Hello, everyone. We have an amazing show for you this week.
We've got a couple of Australian stories. The CEO of Snowy Hydro has stepped down, and we'll talk about a couple of the controversial projects that Snowy Hydro is involved with at the moment and how that might have led to that decision. And then also there is a legal case that's being pushed against Santos, the oil and gas company, for greenwashing.
After that, we dive into the Dominion Wind Offshore project again, as we've been talking about the last few weeks, and some of what the Southern Environmental Law Center is talking about with capacity factor guarantees and the possibility that Dominion may scrap that project.
And the Port of Albany is behind schedule due to a number of environmental concerns. I'm Alan Hall, and I'm here with my good friends Rosemary Barnes and Joel Saxon, and this is the Uptime Wind Energy Podcast. Big controversy down in Australia, Snowy Hydro. And Snowy Hydro is a government-owned energy utility. And it's a very odd name, Rosemary, Snowy Hydro. I guess it is what it is. It's a hydro storage project, right?
Yeah. So, there's a bit of history. It's an important part of Australia's history, actually. After World War II, they decided to build this hydroelectric scheme. It's huge, as a nation-building project, and they brought in a ton of immigrants from, all sorts of countries, but a lot of European immigrants after the war. So it was kind of a kick-started Australian multiculturalism. We'd already had waves of immigrants before that, so it wasn't the very beginning, but definitely lots of immigrants came and turned the Snowy River in the Snowy Mountains. I know a lot of people are surprised to learn that we have snow in Australia, but we do. In the Snowy Mountains, the peaks are over 2,000 meters, so that's high enough to get snow pretty much anywhere. They put in a bunch of dams, a bunch of pipes and a bunch of turbines and made a bunch of hydropower. So that's where the name comes from, the Snowy River Hydroelectric Scheme. Snowy Hydro.
The CEO was, whose name is Paul Broad, was recently, quote unquote, sacked, if that's the proper term in Australia. We would call it fired in America. And he was closely tied with the previous government that was just voted out. And it seems to be a lot of controversy regarding him in particular because there seems like that company, I guess you call it organization, is losing money at a rapid pace. They're talking about $5.1 billion overrun on Snowy 2.0 hydro project. And I guess there's some question of whether these projects were actually needed or not. That's the biggest question. Rosemary, you want to explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I'm not sure if I ever saw the actual CEO speak, Paul Broad, but all of the renewable energy conferences that I've been to since I moved back to Australia like a year and a half ago, they've always got some Snowy Hydro representative there. And it's always really stuck out as being strange that it's a renewable energy company predominantly, right? They're mostly just running hydro assets. That they do have gas peakers as well. But yeah, its essence is hydroelectricity, which is renewable. But the company representatives always talk like they're a fossil fuel company. They're always, we've got to slow down the energy transition. We can't, have 100% renewables because there's no way to store energy. It's like, well, what? You've got this 350 gigawatt hour energy storage project underway. That's what the Snowy 2.0 is. It's connecting two existing reservoirs in the scheme with a pipe and some generation and pumping capability. So yeah, it's like, connecting two huge reservoirs. It's literally 350 gigawatt hours, huge. But yeah, the company's really talks a lot like you would expect a fossil fuel company to talk. So I'm not sure if it's so controversial that this guy would go because it is a government owned company who was really tight with the old energy minister who was really, really tight with the gas industry. The previous government had this obsession with a gas-fired recovery from COVID. With the idea that this would be a really fast and cheap way to to get the economy moving again. But obviously, gas is not cheap anymore. Not even in Australia, even though we have plenty of gas, we export nearly all of it. So gas prices in Australia have been just as high as they have been elsewhere and causing energy crises here. So yeah, it's really interesting. So there are a couple of big projects that Snowy Hydro are working on that are both controversial. Is one, the Snow 2.0 that I was just talking about, to add a bunch of pumped hydro capability. That one was kind of the pet project of an old prime minister, like probably 3 prime ministers ago now, Malcolm Turnbull. He was conservative politician, but really keen on renewables, and eventually got kicked out over it, because in Australia we don't directly elect our prime ministers. It's up to the party, the governing party, to choose them. So his colleagues didn't like his pro-renewables stance, and so they got rid of him. And that one's controversial because it's a big, expensive project, and most people in the energy industry think you could get the same outcomes more cheaply by, a bunch of smaller pumped hydro projects, batteries, and other stuff. And yeah, the cost is blown out. I think it's doubled. It's billions and billions over budget now. Time frame is blowing out as well. And part of the problem is that it's the project is in a national park. The Snowy Mountains are in Kosciuszko National Park is where these assets are located. And I went there for a bike ride last year, and it sounds like it should be a low impact project because you're just connecting to existing reservoirs and, tunnels underground. You shouldn't see it. But I mean, there's a lot of stuff being moved around, a lot of digging, a lot of boring, and all of the stuff that you dig has to go somewhere. And that's bad for the ecosystem. And then not to mention that I still haven't heard exactly how this is going to be connected to, major transmission lines. So that's another point of contention, is that, if your budget doesn't include connecting it to the grid, then it's not really a complete budget. So that's the issues basically in a nutshell with that project. But I personally, I love that national park, and I'm sad to see the impact on it. But I am glad that we're going to get this one big, huge amount of energy storage that will really allow us to, roll out renewables much more rapidly, because there's something there to, fill in the gaps when you got a day or two with low wind.
Well, it's the fact that they're over budget is the biggest concern, or that the fact that they're in a national park?
It's the two things. So for environmentalists, it's the fact that they're in a national park, I think. And for people in the energy industry, it's that it's too expensive for what they're getting. But it's not universally hated by the energy industry, but that I would say is the predominant opinion. Maybe it's a 60-40 split, 60% against and 40% pro. And I'm kind of like exactly on the borderline. It's like I would prefer to achieve that storage in other ways, and I think you could cheaper, but also practically, politics of energy have been just so shocking in Australia especially the last 10 years, but even before that. I just want to see something done, and so, yeah, it's not the best project, but It's a project that has support from, because it was a conservative proposed project, that's going to happen. Whereas if the current government, the progressive government, they can't scrap it now. I mean, the tunnels are well underway, and, it's not going to stop now.
So what's the big issue then?
So I think it's got more to do maybe with a second project, which is more or less 100% everyone hates this project. It's for a new gas power plant at Kurri. Catchy name. And yeah, it's just a new gas power plant that nobody in the energy industry thinks that we need. Just absolutely no one. It's going to be expensive. Its business case only proposes running it with a 2% capacity factor, so it's not going to be providing a lot of energy, a lot of power generation. And it's just a dumb design as well, because it's not. It still only has the capability to run for 6 hours at a stretch, because it's got these something like gas canisters, huge gas canisters that are supplying it. It's not hooked up to any, pipeline, so it can continuously run. So it could fill in, like a week worth of of low wind speed in Australia, which is, kind of the absolute worst case scenario that we would ever see in Australia. So it kind of doesn't really do much. It's going to cost a lot. They've changed the design now, so it would have 10 hours storage instead of 6. And then that has blown out the cost. And the Labor government, that's our current government, that party has never supported this project. They kind of begrudgingly said, okay, well, we'll continue to develop it as long as it's able to be converted to hydrogen, green hydrogen later on. So at least it's not, a fossil fuel project. But that's going to, I understand that they would have, it's not easy to just change over the existing design over to hydrogen. Right. So, so that you might as well just scrap it and start again. And I think if you started again with an honest look at the business case and the need for it, you would never put that in. It's not like we've got no gas generation in Australia, and this would be our first gas peaker. There's other ones available. And, what the free market is doing, because, we do have a pretty, robust electricity market set up in Australia and heaps of private investment. And where the private money is going is all renewables and storage, batteries and smaller pumped hydro projects. So it's just this Kurri thing. It was just because they really wanted to have a gas-fired recovery. They wanted a gas project to announce, and it's just not needed on any sense. So, I think most people in the energy industry would be happy to see some major cultural change happening at Snowy Hydro, because it's a important national asset that we've got, and it's kind of not being run in a way that supports the energy transition. It's kind of more being used as a crowbar in the cogs of change.
Joel, first off, do any large construction projects go under budget?
Not really. It's tough to see. It happens everywhere in the world, right? That these big projects get driven by politics, right? Well, I'm thinking Keystone Pipeline in the U.S., right? Where you say it's so far under construction it can't be stopped. Well, they stopped that one, and it had 1,000 miles in the ground, or plus. So it's just as energy professionals and engineers and people in the space, it's so frustrating to see things controlled by politics, and I just would like to see some of that stop, but I don't see that in our future.
Right, and it's like the money you spent is somehow recoverable. That money's gone.
Yeah, it's gone.
that money is smoke, right? And so it's a question of what it's going to take to finish it, and then do you really need it? And I think the government tries to take on longer term projects that industry won't do by itself. The more difficult ones, because no one wants to invest in those projects. So it's not shocking, Rosemary, that they're going to do something that's unusual. The government asked them to do something unusual.
The Snowy 2.0 pumped hydro project, that fits that definition of something that it's too big that no one in private industry would or could ever do that. So it has that behind it, and you can understand. I think some people are saying that its cost is blown up by 5 times what they originally proposed, but the original costing was obviously wrong to anybody who looked at it. It didn't include, transmission connection and stuff. And the Kurri gas peaker, its cost is about doubled at the moment, but it's also much for, less advanced. So still plenty of time for that one to blow out more. But I suspect we'll see that Kurri plant just disappear, because it just literally no one thinks it's a good idea except for a few in the gas industry and the previous government. They still like it.
Mm-hmm. The people that are working there.
And the ex-CEO of Snowy Hydro, he likes it.
Yeah, well, I think he'll most likely be fine, right? People at the top don't really get hurt. They have a rare set of skills typically, and they'll find another place to go. It's the people working and driving the trucks that have the hard time.
Lightning is an act of God, but lightning damage is not. Actually, it's very predictable and very preventable. Strike Tape is a lightning protection system upgrade for wind turbines made by WeatherGuard. It dramatically improves the effectiveness of the factory LPS, so you can stop worrying about lightning damage. Visit weatherguardwind.com to learn more, read a case study, and schedule a call today.
So then now there's another Australian controversy going on about greenwashing with this energy company called Santos. I can't even say this word. Australasian Center for Corporate Responsibility. Australasian? Is that right, Rosemary?
Yeah, Australasian. That's
Australasian Center for Corporate Responsibility.
Yeah, like you might say the Americas. We've got Australasia. It's just like it's a region. Sometimes called Oceania. Just how do you Australia isn't Asia, but why didn't we're in it? You know, like or close to it. So yeah. It's a new word for you, Australasian. You can practice saying it at home.
Oceania. That's a much cooler name, by the way. You don't see it used very often. Oceania is a cool term. Come on.
Yeah, but also it's less obvious to. I mean, there's oceans everywhere, so maybe it's less specific.
So also, we'll stick with Australasian just because the Australasian Center for Corporate Responsibility filed new allegations against gas producer Santos in a federal case in Australia, obviously, and claiming that the gas producer has breached Australian consumer law by misleading investors about its climate credentials. Now, Rosemary, I'm going to hand it off to you, but let's walk gently on here because I'm always very careful when a consumer group says a corporation has defrauded or misled investors, because pretty much every corporation can be accused of that. So what's the background here?
Well, I picked this one because I know that greenwashing is one of your favorite terms that always excites you every time we have a topic to talk about that involves greenwashing. And I haven't seen a case like this where, in general, companies are just free to say whatever they want about, their environmental plans for the future. Like maybe you can, hold them to account for stuff that they say that they're actually doing. If they, misled investors on that would be one thing. But Santos, they're an oil and gas company, and they've announced net zero by 2040 plans, and it doesn't involve getting out of oil and gas. So that in itself is just clearly greenwashing because net zero doesn't involve business as usual with fossil fuels. Like in no interpretation of the term is that the case. And so, some people some lawyers, I guess, have been through their claims. They've got ridiculous claims about how they're going to reduce their emissions, mostly with carbon capture and storage, which in Australia, we've never successfully implemented a CCS project. And so, they've just used nonsensical methods to come up with this, net zero by 2040 claim. So it just looks like they've just got their normal business plan, which involves just extracting a bunch of oil and gas. And obviously there's a lot of emissions associated with the extraction. They're not required to count the emissions of whatever their customers do with that oil and gas. But just the extraction itself has a lot of emissions, and especially because some of their future assets have a lot of CO2 mixed in with the gas. And so they've got to do something with that. And then they've just said, magically CCS technology is going to be good enough that we're going to be capturing all of this, and it's going to be at this very low price. And then we're going to be using a lot of our gas to make blue hydrogen, which is going to be somehow cheaper than green hydrogen in 2040, which no serious analyst thinks that it will be, I don't think, especially not these days. So it's kind of like, to me, it just sounds like sort of really common greenwashing that every oil and gas company that is pretending to have a net zero commitment, they're all doing similar things. But it's just interesting that in this case, people have actually, filed a lawsuit. Like, these are just too ridiculous, and it's not, it's misleading to tell your investors that you're going to be net zero and that the impact on your bottom line is going to be, nothing basically as a result. So, that's the case.
But in this case, it's just projections, right? I think every corporation has projections on where it's going to be in, 5 years out would be really too far, honestly, to project. But they're saying 2040, so you're talking 18-ish years out in the future. It's pretty hard to predict what's going to happen over the next 18 years. It's up for debate. I don't think I hold them accountable for that so much, right? If you're thinking you're going to get to 2040, there's just going to be monumental changes between now and 2040. That's not an unreasonable position, is it?
Yeah, but think about it from another company, you know, like if I'm a car manufacturer and I'm like, oh, steel's going to be free in 2040. So we're going to be making just tons of money. And, you know, we're going to be able to make our cars for $2.50, sell them for $2.50. So we'll have 100% of the market, you know, like that you wouldn't let them get away with that, even though, you know, I mean, I guess it's possible. You can't like prove that that won't happen. But yeah, I mean, it's just there's possible and there's, you know, some sort of plausibility has to be required. Otherwise, why do you bother to do projections at all if you can just make up all of the inputs into those calculations? You can get whatever number you want. And so...
Would you imagine that the shareholders, of which there must be large institutional investors in a company like Santos, reviewed those numbers and either agreed or disagreed by the way that they either purchased stock or sold stock in that company?
Well, Santos must think that there's a point, there's a value in their net zero by 2040 goal, because otherwise they wouldn't have made it and advertised it everywhere. So I think you'd have to say, yes, there is some behavior has changed. Otherwise they wouldn't have bothered.
There's a lack of, and this is something I was just talking to someone about the other day. A large company that I know a friend is involved with, they just recently turned their chief marketing officer into their chief sustainability officer. So now that person who is the chief marketing officer is because they're good at communicating, they're now the chief sustainability officer. Well, then it spurred a conversation of, you have a case like this with the Santos case where there might not be, and I have to kind of agree with this. There's not really enough people to properly vet this stuff in the marketplace, right? There's not enough Rosemary Barnes out there in the world that they can be employed by every company. So some of the stuff coming out, or employed by the institutionalized investors, whatever, some of the things coming out, some of the things getting due diligence on them are not actually being done by experts or people that can really dive into the data or the numbers or have the facts. So some of the stuff comes out and it's just, you know, for a lack of a better term, almost like diarrhea of the mouth, kind of, here you go, some data.
Yeah.
But there's nobody there the people putting it out don't properly know. The people QCing it or vetting it don't properly know. So I think because sustainability hasn't been high on the radar for everybody for, you know, like 50 years, like something else has. It's more in the last 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 years that it's slowly come into place where it's a big part of the corporate global economy. And so there isn't the skill set there in some of these companies.
But doesn't ESG force them to do that? Right? ESG forces them to respond in this nature.
And it's the same thing, right? The ESG is there, but who controls the ESG stuff? It's not always, like I said, it's not always a Rosemary Barnes there.
That's who. I mean, ESG, you're talking about fluctuations in markets and massive movement of markets. Lehman Brothers would be around if everybody understood what the bond market was in the United States for the home bond market. There wouldn't have been a collapse of the stock market based on Enron. Those things are like just plain out, in some cases, somewhat obvious. For people that were working in those industries up close, they saw that. I think all these energy companies need oversight. I'm just not sure taking them to court is the right way to do it. I think you could make some claims. I mean, obviously, during the shareholder meetings, you can propose whatever you want, and if you get enough shareholders to agree, then you can actually change the board in some of these places or fire directors or whatever you want to do. I'm not sure the court of law is the place for this to happen. It can say it's a consumer. You're mistreating the consumer. I'm not sure that's a proper way to do this, because I think every company has projections that are very rosy. I saw one today from a wind related company, and I thought, oh, come on, that's crazy. There's no way the economics are ever going to play out in that manner, but they can get, and they believe it, right? So they do believe these things. It isn't like they don't believe them. I think we're making an assumption that the leaders of Santos don't believe this. Maybe they do. I don't know. I just find it, getting the information out there is a better way of going about it than trying to sue these guys. What's the outcome? Santos is going to pay them what?
Oh, maybe they have to change their claims and, companies, because Santos is not the only company that's doing this. Like I said, I think any oil and gas company that has a net zero target is doing exactly the same thing, or maybe not so egregiously. But the outcome I would love to see is that people realize that that net zero, or, your emissions plans. It's not something that you can just invent out of thin air, that you actually have to plan to reduce your emissions and then take steps to do that. That would be the outcome. So, I think that would be very good, because at the moment sustainability is for many companies just a marketing exercise, and it's just a matter of what they can get away with. Sure. So I don't know. I think it's definitely a blurry area, and I was surprised to see an actual legal action raised over this, because there's projections in the future are hard, and sometimes ridiculous claims are made. But on the other hand, misleading investors is definitely something that needs to be illegal and needs to be, followed up on. There's been plenty of examples of that recently. Sure. I mean, Elon Musk was fined, right? At least once, maybe several times for just making up ridiculous statements that weren't really true. People make their investment decisions based on these announcements, and if it's legitimately just false, misleading, not based on anything, I think that companies should be held to account.
I think the leaders of every corporation are in somewhat dreamers, right? Especially innovative companies. They're dreamers. What the point of the board of directors and the shareholders is to dive into the details and make sure this dreamer is not off track and this company is going to go into the ditch.
Yeah,
I mean, we're all responsible for that.
There's a difference, right? Like the Elon Musk kind of dreaming, where he's like, people will be living on Mars by, I don't know, whatever date that he originally said, 2025 or something. But then, he's started a company that is working towards doing that, trying to implement the dream. Whereas an oil and gas company that's just like, I have a dream that one day emissions from burning fossil fuels will just totally disappear, and then just continues business as usual. I mean, that's a different kind of dreaming, and it's more like magical thinking rather than like entrepreneurial, big picture thinking.
Well, you can imagine Rosemary. Let's make Rosemary the CEO of an oil and gas company in Australia. Right? So, Rosemary, you're now the head of this company, and you have to steer this company into 2040. Is that an easy position to be in?
No.
What are you going to do?
No.
Are you going to lay off everybody and tell them to go home? You see, it's a lot easier from the outside. If you're that person, what are you doing here? How are you going to do this?
I don't feel sympathy for these companies that have been purposely getting in the way of, recognizing the challenge of climate change for decades now, and spending a lot of effort trying to confuse the public about whether this was a real problem or not. They would have had a much easier time to move into a sustainable business model if they had done it where the writing was on the wall 30 years ago. Everyone knew about it. Any oil and gas company that really took it seriously back then could have changed to a sustainable business model by now. There's plenty of other ways
we should always do good things earlier. Rosemary.
Yeah.
Rosemary. We should always do great things sooner, right? That's always the answer. Why didn't we build, why didn't we X? We should always do it sooner.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll grant you that. We always should do it sooner. But we're here in 2022 and they're trying to get to 2040. Yeah. The CEO is under now a lawsuit.
Yeah.
If you're running that company, what do you do? Is the answer just to close up the doors and send everybody home, or to create a plan to get you to 2040 where you still are paying people, that the shareholders are still involved, and that the doors are open?
Just don't make a net zero by 2040 target and announce it everywhere and advertise yourself as a climate friendly company if it's impossible that you could actually do that. That would be the first step. And secondly, I don't think that these companies have a right to exist in the future. If they can only do it in a way that destructs the environment, then they shouldn't exist.
The fact of an oil company or a gas company producing energy that created the economy in which we all now exist in, that's not evil. If they're trying to get to a better solution in the future, we should encourage them to do that. Suing them at this point doesn't really help that.
But the point of the suing is that they're not trying to do that. The point of the lawsuit is you say that you're trying to do that, but you're really not. And if they really were, then they wouldn't be getting sued.
That's an opinion. Well,
that's the whole point of the case. That that
Right.
it's not realistic. Their
Right.
plan
No,
is
I agree.
yeah.
Yeah. And if I pulled open 100 corporate statements, particularly around Silicon Valley, 99 of them would just be complete garbage. They're going to get to $100 million or $1 billion in 3 years. I see those presentations all the time. And I don't think an oil and gas is necessary company is excluded from being sort of aggressively forward-looking in a positive sense. Wouldn't a better tack, my opinion, wouldn't a better tack be to call them out? You might the newspaper write articles saying or opinions to, like, if you wrote a letter to the editor, Rosemary, because you do wield some power here. If you wrote a letter to the editor, an opinion piece, and said, hey, these numbers don't make any sense, we should be encouraging them to clean up what they're doing. That's the future. That's where they need to go. Here are some steps that they should be pursuing. That, I think, is much better situation than paying a bunch of lawyers, because what you're going to do is pay a bunch of lawyers.
Agree to
They need
disagree.
a consultant.
Okay. Yeah, and the consultants. Yeah.
They need a consultant. That's right.
Yeah.
They need a lot of consultants. Yeah, that's what it's. Yeah. No, it's fine if we disagree. I just think you got to take both sides of it and realize the other side doesn't have an easy pathway either. And it's easy, and it is a little bit easier to stand on the outside. And I did look up the amount of emissions, CO2 emissions this morning. I was looking up CO2 emissions by country. Australia is not in the top 10. Australia contribution to CO2 in the world about a little over 1%. You're equivalent to about Turkey.
Oh yeah, but our
So even
population
if
is
Australia
small
goes
too. And if you look at the
it's totally true.
yeah,
True.
and if you look per capita, then we're near the top. We're punching above our weight.
Yeah.
But if you also
But if you go to zero,
no, but
is it going to make that much of a difference?
That's emissions in Australia, whereas if you counted all of the emissions from the stuff we sell to other countries, then the picture changes. So because you don't count the emissions of our coal industry because the coal's burnt overseas. Same with gas and everything,
China,
except for the emissions
mostly.
that.
Right.
A lot of it in China, but I mean a lot of other places as well. If you include
the best
all
way
that,
to reduce CO2 emissions is to stop selling coal to China. Maybe that would help.
yeah, I'm sure they would.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
I'm serious. I'm dead serious about that. I think that's if you really want to cut down CO2 emissions, shutting off Australia from gas and oil is not going to make that much difference. Stopping the coal shipments would make a much bigger difference.
Yeah, all of it. And I mean, there's plenty of people that are same type of people that are involved in this legal action are definitely involved in trying to shut down new coal projects and would love us to stop exporting all of these things. I don't really engage with that too much because I just think it's so unlikely to happen that it's not really worth spending a lot of time thinking about. But other people are, and that's good for them.
And speaking as the token American at the moment, we're about 15% of emissions or so. So we're like 15 times Australia in terms of emissions. I think that's what the number is. It may be higher, but yeah, I mean, obviously America's got to do something about their emissions too, and I totally agree that we should be moving towards that. It's just whether we find a way to do it that gets us there sooner. Speaking as an engineer, we all have great ideas, but engineers try to hone in on what gets you there the fastest, at the lowest cost, those sort of things. That's why we go to school, and that's why we spend so much time thinking about these things. Like Rosemary's constantly thinking about all these renewable ideas and why it impacts the world. And that's what we should be doing. People like us, mostly Rosemary, are the ones who are going to help us get us there. And it's due time that we start writing letters to the editor and writing opinion pieces. I think those are going to have more impact than suing some of these companies for
Do people read the newspaper anymore?
YouTube channels, Rosemary?
Yeah, I have 70 videos online. Those are my letters to the editor. But people do see them as well. Like I know people in government have, told me, I looked up CCS is a good example. I wanted to know how carbon capture actually works. And when I Googled that, your video was the first thing that came up. And, that's exactly why I spend so much effort on the channel, is because the information isn't necessarily out there. Yeah, I tried really hard for like
you're right.
6 months to figure out how carbon capture actually works and whether it will one day, be a reliable and cost-effective way to reduce emissions. And I just couldn't find the answers, and that's why I had to get an expert to spend a few hours explaining it to me, and then a few tens of hours making the video so that I could share that, because it's not so easy to get the information that you need to make good decisions.
See, and Rosemary, I thought about you today because I saw something out of the Department of Energy where they're promoting spending a lot of money on carbon capture systems. And I thought, they didn't watch Rosemary's video, did they? They totally did not. Because the amount of money they're spending in the hopes that they're going to have a significant carbon capture from the atmosphere seem out of touch with where the engineering is right now.
Yeah, I'm not anti-CCS. I'm a lot more pro than most people like me. I'm glad that we're doing research on it, and I'm glad that there are projects that are, finding all of the problems with it, because in general, the CCS projects are completely unsuccessful if if your goal is to capture CO2, either from a power plant or a gas reservoir or out of the air. They're not capturing meaningful volumes of CO2 and won't for years and years, but they are learning all the problems with the technology. And I think that in 2050, we're going to need this technology to be able to do something. My problem with CCS is when people talk about it as an option instead of decarbonising, when it can only work in parallel to, and it's not even in parallel, because it's like decarbonise first and then CCS will be ready to, by 2050 to take over that last little bit. So I like to see the research. I just don't like to see the reporting on it that makes people think that they don't have to do anything else.
The projects I saw, Alan, that was kind of tied together with that is down in Louisiana. Air Products, $4.5 billion in a CCS, but it's tied together. It's tied together with a chemical facility. So they're creating multiple different chemicals there at the site, and whatever is byproduct they're injecting into the ground. So it's not like they're going to the air, we're going to capture it and bring it in as the sole source of chemicals. So they're using it as, we're going to build this new plant to create hydrogen, ammonia, diesel fuel, whatever it is. And when it's a byproduct of bad stuff, instead of just letting it go, we're going to inject it in the ground. So I think of that $4.5 billion that they're putting into that facility, like the initial phase is a couple $100 million are going into carbon capture, seismic geophysical studies and whatnot there. So they're trying to figure some of those things out.
That makes sense. Yeah, Joel, I think that makes complete sense. If you have a large carbon emitter, the more you capture it there instead of trying to capture 0.04% of it from the atmosphere. Yeah.
And they've got the DOE behind them. They've got the state of Louisiana behind them. They got a lot of heavy hitters pulling on this project. It's very, very visible down there too. Wow, that's cool. Mm-hmm. There you go. Rosemary, you're having an impact. That project actually makes sense. They got their idea from me. 100%. You never know. They might have. It's probably the butterfly effect, right? Yes. It's possible that project idea came before my YouTube channel, but I'll take it. Take the win. I'll take this. I'll take this win and feel special.
Ping Monitor is a continuous blade monitoring system which allows wind farm operators to stay ahead of maintenance. Wind techs can often hear damaged blades from the ground, but they can't continuously monitor all the turbines. They also can't calculate how bad the damage is or how fast it's propagating based on sound, but Ping can. Ping's acoustic system is being used on over 600 turbines worldwide. It allows operators to discover damage before it gets expensive and prioritize maintenance needs across their fleet, and it pays for itself the first time it identifies serious damage or saves you from doing an unnecessary visual inspection. Stop flying blind out there. Get Ping's ears on your turbines. Learn more at pingmonitor.co.
So offshore off of Virginia Beach, this is in the United States, we're moving back to the United States, where Dominion Energy is going to put 176 Siemens Gamesa wind turbines offshore to power up to 660,000 homes. There is a problem. And the Southern Environmental Law Center pushed for the capacity factor requirements for that project, and they're now discussing it openly of why they did it. They're trying to push towards a zero carbon grid by 2050, and they think that the sort of the intra workings of the government and policy boards essentially can set these requirements for capacity factors. And the reason that they think they can set them is because, well, it just needs to happen. Now, I think it's really interesting that they're pushing for this, because I think Dominion is very upset about it and realizes that puts them at huge risk. What the Southern Environmental Law Center is basically saying with these capacity factor requirements is that if the project doesn't reach its performance requirements, then Dominion's going to have to buy replacement energy, and the ratepayer shouldn't have to pay anything towards that extra energy purchase, but the shareholder should pay that. Now, I thought, oh, wait a minute, time out. Joel, since when have shareholders paid for projects that have gone sideways or for losses? How does that work? Like if I hold stock in Ford and Ford makes a car that explodes, do they come to my house and say, well, you're a shareholder, you need to send us $1,000 so we can get these cars fixed? That isn't how it works. Eventually, the people who buy the cars are the ones who are going to pay it. The rate holders here, or the ratepayers in Virginia, are going to pay that regardless.
I think this is the premise of this lawsuit, or what they're trying to do here with these things, could have rippling effects all the way up to our Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Because it's the government meddling in capitalism, and that doesn't really fly in the U.S. I mean, that's what we're based on, right?
Well, I think they can put down requirements for performance. I think they can do that. But as we're going to hear about next, Dominion is saying, well, if you do that, then we're not going to make the project. So you can just dream on about 2050 being carbon free in your grid, because we're not going to sign up to a project in which we lose a bunch of money. It does. I don't see, the language here sounds very political. Well, we don't want the ratepayers to pay for the extra energy that the wind turbines didn't create. We want the shareholders to do that. That's a nice sentiment. That's a nice statement, but it's meaningless. The ratepayers always pay. Always.
We're dialing it back. This conversation is the same one we had at the beginning of the show when we talked about large infrastructure projects being politically driven, right?
Right.
While this is actually not funded by the government, right? I mean, there's of course the IRA Act is going to help them a little bit, but this is Dominion Energy, and to my knowledge, a private energy corporation. They're not a government entity. I don't believe. It's just like a monopoly sort of thing. They're in
utility corporation.
Yeah, they're in coal. They're in natural gas. They're creating energy for the masses, and they've decided to take this project on. And if it goes over and they have to charge more, then that's how it works. That's how the energy markets work. Sorry.
Right. And part of the push that the Southern Environmental Law Center has been really enacted in terms of law back in 2020 in the Clean Economy Act is that they're going to shut down all coal and oil burning power generation from Dominion by 2024.
By 2024, so, they won't even have this wind farm won't even be running by 2024.
It won't now. Not if they keep doing what they're doing and going back and forth. Right. It doesn't seem like that makes a lot of sense. It seems like they're going to put the ratepayers at risk. Right. It may achieve your carbon neutral goals. That may occur. But what is the downside cost of that for doing it? Shouldn't they be promoting getting this wind farm up and running along with a number of other renewable projects if they really want to get the grid clean by 2050? Rosemary, doesn't that make sense?
Well, I'm not so familiar with how the whole energy mix works, and if it could be separate issues. You know, it's not. There's coal power plants closing down all over the world very rapidly. In Australia, they keep on bringing forward, their announced closing dates, and it's not because they think they have something else to replace it. It's because they're losing money on it, and if you've got an asset that's losing money every day, then you want to shut that down as fast as possible. So it's possible that they're not related to each other. And I would assume that that's the case. Otherwise, it's a bit silly. And for the reasons that you point out.
Yeah, I'm sure Siemens Gamesa is a little freaked out about this. It's 176 wind turbines. Joel, if I sold 176 wind turbines, my sales commission, I assume I could look forward to buying a new boat or something. Right? 176 wind turbines.
Well, I mean, there's your basic rule is 1 million a megawatt in the U.S., right? So
yeah.
And that's just for the turbines. That doesn't count foundations, anything else offshore. Offshore,
right.
Cables, all this good jazz, right? So if you have to replace one onshore, that's what it costs. Offshore, man, 176, and I would imagine these are, what is it, Siemens Gamesa? If these got to be at least
megawatt.
Well, they're eight at a minimum, right?
Yeah, 8 times. Oh, sorry. No, we're going to do math in our head, everybody.
No, I'm doing it on a calculator.
It's somewhere around a gigawatt, right? Yeah.
If it's
it will be, yeah.
If it's a gigawatt, I mean, you're $1 billion worth of turbines.
Well,
right?
Wow, that let you take the sales group out to Arby's and celebrate.
Yeah, I hope you get a new boat. Well, yeah. So Siemens Gamesa. I mean, Siemens. Now we're as the conversation has gone today, shareholders. Now you have an agency messing with a private company that can affect the shareholders. Yeah. So does the SEC hold those guys accountable? Yeah,
and I think Dominion's responses to it is this governance board can't set those kind of rules. That's things that are left up to the legislature, and the legislature did not establish that. So if they want to do this capacity factor thing, they have to go to the elected representatives and make it so. I think they're going to have a hard time doing that. I think in Virginia, they would have a very difficult time doing this. This is probably why they did it at this sort of deep in the governmental system, why they did it way down here instead of at the very exposed legislature where there would be news about it and a lot more kerfuffle about it. It's going to end up there anyway. I think what Dominion, and this is my prediction, Rosemary, you can call me crazy, but I think Dominion's just going to put their hands up in the air and says, well, I guess the project is off until we get this capacity factor situation resolved.
No, they have to.
So they hold
as
the
well.
lease rights too, right?
Yeah, they have to. They have to act in the interests of their shareholders, and they can't control what the wind is going to be like. And this, particular arrangement holds them responsible if there's low wind speed for 3 years in a row, lower than average wind speed 3 years in a row. Then that would be on them. And it's weird to even propose it. There's places that you can buy weather insurance from. That's the correct kind of place to go to hedge on that risk. So I don't know why they're trying to make a manufacturer or a development company responsible for the wind. That's not their core business. And I would also, a huge deal. And I'm sure Dominion doesn't want to step away from it, but you have to, if you're being, told that you have to accept the, consequences of a risk that you have no way to control, that is not a sensible business decision to make.
I think some of the things that we're starting to see now, you're seeing weird rules pop up in laws and different things. So you saw this one pop up here. Yeah. You see in Louisiana where if they put offshore turbines within the state boundaries of their economic zone, that the state gets a kickback. So you're seeing something that I don't know if we've seen in the United States in a long time, but it's an industry popping up that's very new, right? Offshore wind. So all these different states and entities and government people are trying to say like, oh, we can put our spin on it. We can put our stamp on it. We can do this. We can get the most out of it. And don't want to get just run over by it and take it, and taken out to the cleaners by, oh man, 20 years down the line, we could have done what Louisiana did and, get some of this, but then did it stifle development or whatever? And because I thinking about, I used to work in West Africa quite a bit. And a lot of those governments got taken like a hand of because they didn't think about things beforehand or know to not get exploited by people out there doing, oil and gas offshore, onshore. And now they've gone to the other side of things where they're making it very difficult to do things there. So you can kind of see some of that same, not as extreme, of course, right? But that same play going on here where you have people trying to stick their head in as far as they can to get what they can out of it, whether it's a government agency, a state or whatever, because it's so new and it's new things that come along that are worth billions don't happen every decade. So I think you'll see some more weird stuff pop up as we continue down this train path of offshore wind in the U.S.
Right, and I don't think this is the last hurdle for this project, because as we see up in my neck of the woods near Albany, New York, they're trying to modernize a port so they can assemble wind turbine towers. And as part of that, they have to do a little bit of dredging and create a platform on a place called Beacon Island. So it sits sort of on the Hudson River. So the Army Corps of Engineers is up there, and they're planning out how to get this wind turbine development site set up so they can assemble these towers and send them downstream. And they're running into all kinds of environmental problems. So the National Marine Fisheries Service and the Environmental Protection Agency have urged the Corps of Engineers to deny or withhold permits over environmental concerns at this site. And they list a couple of reasons. One of them is including fears of the potential destruction of habitats of sturgeon and other fish, as well as wetlands. Now, we're talking about a 500-foot wharf. So 500 feet is a couple of 2 football fields, roughly, length of wharf that's going to be dredged. I think that's the concern, right? They're going to dredge this thing. Now, it's a very weird situation because Equinor is trying to work in the bite and get their offshore wind up and running. And then they're relying upon these, what I'll say, government-backed, government-operated sites to have these places ready to go, and they're not moving. And it's a very odd situation because the head of the Port of Albany described it as Megan Daly said. It was wrong to assert that these agencies were denying dredging permits, even though obviously they did request to deny dredging permits. And this is sort of a repeat of what happened in the springtime. And so in the springtime, they wanted to do some tree cut and some soil excavation so they can pack the soil, so they can put heavy things on it. They started to do that, and the Corps of Engineers said, wait, you don't have all the permits. And they got a waiver at some point. The Port of Albany got a waiver, but the Corps of Engineers said, you don't have all the paperwork. You got to shut this thing off. So they have been standstill since the spring. So we're talking about, we're going into winter. It's going to start snowing here in about 30 days, and then it'll be over. And we're into next year. So the project is probably close to a year behind. If we're really serious about offshore wind in America, then we got to figure out ways to get things done. And it is nice that the Department of Energy can put on short little videos about how great this renewable future looks like. But when you get down to the details, like the engineers live in all the time, Rosemary and Joel live in all the time in the detail world, those details matter. And if you overlook those details, these projects go nowhere. And we will never get 30 gigawatts by 2030 unless there is some weight or emphasis or people assigned to get these issues resolved. I don't know none of us know, Joel. You have any idea what the final outcome of this will be? I don't.
I bet it'll go forward, but it will just be delayed, as most things with the government is, especially our federal government, right? I've dealt with the Army Corps of Engineers many times in different areas of the U.S., and they're a pain every time. I've walked onto projects saying, yeah, we're going to start in 6 weeks, mobilize, spend $1 million mobilizing, and you don't have a permit from everybody else is good, but the Corps of Engineers doesn't give you a permit for 6 months. And it might not be because of something specific. It might just be because it sat on someone's desk and they didn't look at it. That's an extreme case, right?
I think they're understaffed. No, I think they're understaffed. And we just added 87,000 IRS agents.
Yeah.
But what do we do for the Army Corps of Engineers? Really?
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah,
we like
absolutely.
double the amount of auditors in the country. But the things that really matter, like getting some renewable energy projects up and running, what have we done there? I can't put my finger on it, and I don't see any good things coming out of the DOE talking about it, because that's where the action is right now. It's not at the signing a bill and all the pomp and circumstance there. It's down in the trenches, literally in the water. That's where the action is.
Read this thing here. If you read it, you have, and I'm just going to list off. These are just some of our notes for the people listening. Port of Albany, one government agency. Army Corps of Engineers, 2. Yep. National Marine Fisheries, 3. EPA, 4. Who's next? I mean, and these are just the ones. Department of Environmental Conservation, 5. Town of this, town of that, 7. Now that's just quick and one little
Concerned
thing. That's
citizens.
There's a lot of stakeholders of the area. There's this, there's that. You're talking 7 governmental municipal agencies that are all want to have their say in it, and then you have Equinor as a private company sitting back there going, or not private, but you know what I'm saying, non-governmental entity sitting back going like, come on guys, we would like to get this going. They've got no power over any of it, which is by the setup, but there's no urgency in getting these things resolved, because that's Port of Albany. That's one spot, right? All up and down that East Coast.
One of many.
Yeah, there's one of many. There's all along that East Coast, you're getting things built. And I think that's why, to be honest, I've seen quite a few articles about Gulf Coast offshore wind.
I think
the Gulf Coast offshore wind, because all of the ports are there. All of the sites are there. All of the ability to build jackets, the vessels, everything. Like if you're going to do it somewhere, the Gulf Coast has got it already.
Rosemary, what's the solution, right? You're the big problem solver. What's the solution to all this craziness?
I don't know. These are the problems that I don't like, because I see both sides, and I don't want to say just scrap the need for approvals or just don't do it properly, but yeah, I guess the solution is some better bureaucratic processes. And I think the US is still ahead of Europe, where they're at. They're taking sometimes like 9 years to get wind farms approved. And, they love documentation, I would say, more in Europe, the average European country, than they do in the US or Australia. So you're not alone in the problem, and you're not the worst at it. But yeah, it's just you need streamlined processes to make sure things get checked, but maybe reduce some time frames. And it doesn't sound like anyone's saying this shouldn't go ahead, though. It's more just a matter of No
one wants to say that, Rosemary. Nobody wants to say stop the project. They want to say pause, delay, research, which essentially means stop.
Do you think that's... I wasn't getting that vibe from it, but, it's not my country, so I can't read the nuance as well as in Australia, I can tell when a project is going to be delayed until it's uneconomic. And that's certainly been the strategy with a lot of new coal mines that they want to open up, or gas projects or whatever. It's like, yeah, sure, you can do it, but we're going to make sure it takes 5 years, because we know that in 5 years this will not be an economic project anymore, and you won't want to do it anymore. I didn't get that vibe from it here, but it might be because I'm not immersed in the culture.
To give you a picture of the culture and how it interacts with the federal government, follow the history of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, because it's literally within 10 days of every presidential election, this policy changes on the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Conservatives get in, open, have at it. The other side of the fence gets in, shut it down. And that's just how it goes. Boom, 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 boom. So I think that depending on what happens, you'll see some of these things will get delayed until election cycles. And if these get held up until the next election cycle, depending on what happens, things will change. And that's the scary thing about investing in specifically offshore wind in the U.S.
Yeah. It's environmental ping pong. It's environmental ping pong. Who wants to play that game with your money?
Yeah, no. Especially when you have no control over it. It's amazing to me that they got $4.7 billion out of the New York Bight auction just because of how risky it is.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. You nailed it, Joel, because I was thinking just of that. Like, man, if I had a couple $1 billion involved in these offshore projects right now, I would really be pissed off that the government can't get out of the government's way. Just make a decision. We'll live with it. And we'll figure out how to get to plan B. That's what engineers are good at. But they're never going to get to plan B unless they can get off of plan A first. And we're stuck. We're crazily stuck. Frustrating.
So I guess we're going to just have to start manufacturing towers and turbines in Canada and shipping them down.
Or Australia. I think you probably have an easier time on Australia right now and just ship them over, float them over. That's going to do it for this week's Uptime Wind Energy Podcast. Thanks for listening. Please take a moment and give us a 5-star rating on your podcast platform. Be sure to subscribe in the show notes below to the Uptime Tech News, our weekly newsletter, as well as Rosemary's YouTube channel, Engineering with Rosie. And we'll see you here next week on the Uptime Wind Energy Podcast.